Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome to this week's Mental Monday. This week, I thought we could do a little mini series on something that is super close to my heart. It is something that I have experienced in quite a number of occasions in my life, and I've really grown my understanding of it and grown my heart for it, and just it has become something that means so much to me and is such a important thing for me that I thought I would talk about it. So that is the topic of dementia and caring for somebody with dementia. So I thought we could start off by looking at a definition of dementia. I thought we could head to my trusty Mayo Clinic to look at some of the symptoms and kind of a definition of dementia before going into my experiences with it and how to care for somebody with it. So an overview that Mayo Clinic gives of it is dementia isn't a specific disease. Instead, dementia describes a group of symptoms affecting memory, thinking, and social abilities severely enough to interfere with daily functioning. Though dementia generally involves memory loss has different causes. So memory loss alone doesn't mean you have dementia. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of progressive dementia in older adults, but there are a number of causes of dementia. Depending on the cause, some dementia symptoms can be reversed. So some of the symptoms are, under cognitive changes, it says memory loss, which is usually noticed by a spouse or someone else, difficulty communicating or finding words, difficulty reasoning or problem solving, difficulty handling complex tasks, difficulty with planning and organizing, difficulty with coordination and motor functions, and confusion and disorientation. And then under psychological changes, it says personality changes, depression, anxiety, inappropriate behavior, paranoia, agitation, and hallucination. I thought I'd hit a little bit of what it says for causes, just because I feel like that is something that can be so unique to each case, and I feel like that's the part that not as many people understand, especially when it comes to the connection between Alzheimer's and dementia. They are not the same thing, and I'll get into that in a second. So, some of the causes it says are dementia involves damage of nerve cells in the brain, which can occur in several areas of the brain. Dementia affects people differently depending on the area of the brain affected. Dementia are often grouped by what they have in common, such as part of the brain that's affected, or whether they worsen over time, so if it's progressive dementia. Some dementias, such as those caused by a reaction to medications or vitamin deficiencies, might improve with treatment. So now I want to talk a little bit about my experience with it and how I have experienced is the best way to care for somebody with dementia. My grandparents, both of my maternal grandparents, had dementia. My grandma had it first, and then my grandfather like 5 years after she passed away, and they each had different causes. My grandmother's was caused by strokes. My grandfather's was caused by a bleeding ulcer that was a major blood loss, that he'd already had some symptoms before, but that's kind of what kick-started its progression and it becoming worse. Both of theirs, while not Alzheimer's, neither of them had Alzheimer's, it was progressive. It did get progressively worse as time went on. It became harder for them to remember things. It became harder for them to understand things. They would get confused easier, and eventually both of them needed around-the-clock care. So, I experienced taking care of both of them. I helped my mom and my aunt take care of both of them at different points. Me and my brothers both took turns staying with both of them at different points. And my grandmother, we actually decided to put into a care home just because my grandfather is only like 6 months younger than her, and it was not healthy for him trying to take care of her himself at home. That was such a struggle. As she progressed worse, it just got more and more to a point where it was putting too much strain on him, and it was just not helpful or healthy. So we made that decision for her, and that meant going and visiting her as often as we could. That meant going and getting her and bringing her to the house for family functions, and that meant reminding her of different things as we went along. The way my mom described it to me when I was at that age, because that started when I was about 12, was that she could remember A and she could remember C, but she didn't have B in the middle to connect the two. And my most concrete example of that was she would tell me she loved me. She would tell me all day long that she loved me, up until the end where it started going away a little bit, and then she did it one last time pretty close to when she died. Could remember, and she knew those feelings when she saw me. And it was the same with all of us. She knew that she loved us, but she couldn't remember the relation. She couldn't always remember our names, although I was the only granddaughter, so my name got a little more easily remembered because she didn't have other granddaughter names to try to remember at the same time. But those connections in the middle were gone, but she still could feel she loved us, and she knew there was a connection there. So that led to C, where she would say I love you, she would hug and kiss us still when we said hi, she would call us honey and sweetie and sweetheart, and she would still act loving because she felt it and she knew that was there. She just wasn't sure what the connection was. Did she always remember and always act that way? No. Because the confusion gets scary, especially in the beginning where they aren't sure what's going on. They don't know why they can't remember. They don't know why they feel like they're losing control of things, and it just gets scary. And I feel like that's just a normal reaction. That would be really scary if you are noticing that you're forgetting stuff, or you're feeling really, really confused and all of a sudden you aren't sure where you are. And this is actually something that runs in my family. Her parents had it also, and so my grandmother experienced taking care of her parents in the same way, although again it was kind of different causes also, because each cause for dementia just being a symptom, can be different. So then my grandfather started having trouble, and we didn't notice actually until he had an episode with his bleeding ulcer. He had a bleeding ulcer since the 70s, and it hadn't actually done anything since then, and I believe he was on medication to try to keep it under control because they had healed it, but it's still always there unless it completely heals on its own. Otherwise, they just try to close it and stop the bleeding. But that's just a side note. He had had symptoms that we didn't notice before because he was living alone at that time. My grandmother had passed away by then, and we were going over there fairly regularly, but not enough to really notice how bad it was getting. We would notice he would forget little things, but we weren't noticing any confusion really. It was more forgetfulness. Like, oh, I would hear my mom say a lot, oh, Dad, remember this? Remember I told you that? Or, no, Dad, we talked about this is what we were gonna do. And them kind of, there were little moments of them reminding him of stuff. Nothing majorly red flagging. Nothing that said to us, from what we were able to notice, oh, yeah, we probably need to be watching him closer now, and maybe he shouldn't be alone as much as he is. And then he had the episode. Lost a lot of blood. It was really scary. He was hospitalized, and that is when that blood loss is when it really, really kick-started it. And it was the same kind of thing with my grandma. The real start of hers kick-starting and getting worse and being noticeable and actually starting to affect things was after she fell and broke her ankle in the middle of the night. And they didn't have a cause for it, and she couldn't remember it, and they ended up finding out that she had a stroke. It wasn't a major stroke, but we were pretty sure after a while that she'd had a little stroke, and that's why she fell. And that, after she went to the hospital for that, after she went through surgery on her ankle, that is when it kick-started it, and hers got progressively worse. We were noticing it even in the hospital after surgery. So there were those key moments where it had been happening a little bit already, and then that really kick-started it, and that is when it started getting worse. My grandfather, we were a little shaky about care homes after going through some things with my grandma. We weren't stoked on what we were seeing, and those are expensive as well, so we really had to think about what we were going to do. And in the beginning, my grandfather was still aware enough to be a little aware of what was going on. He was definitely aware that we were more attentive to him, that we were a little more worried about him, and that we were much more like, no, Dad, we need to make sure you're okay. For me, no, Papa, we need to make sure you're okay. I need to stay with you and make sure you're okay. And so he definitely noticed that. And then about halfway through that whole time period with him until he passed away, he started kind of giving into it a little bit and realizing he wasn't remembering like he thought he was. He was not understanding everything as well. He even asked my mom a couple times, am I forgetting things? And she would say, yeah, Dad, we've been reminding you of some things. And she didn't want to make him feel bad or scare him, but it definitely was an interesting time period where he was in the middle of not being totally gone to where he wasn't aware, but also not remembering things and having those moments of, oh my gosh, I'm starting to forget things. And he knew what that meant. He had that time period where he knew what that meant because he had experienced it with my grandma's parents, with her, and so he was not totally unaware of what that meant and what that was starting. And with him, we actually decided to do in-home care, and in-home care is super more expensive. Caregivers charge a lot more to come into your home, especially if you need them overnight, than if you're taking them to a facility that they have their own around-the-clock staff that you're just paying a regular fee for. It gets much more expensive, and the way we kind of tried to help that was we would switch off with family members. So I was in school a decent amount of it back where I'm from, and so any days I didn't have school, I would help out by going and staying with him, and my brother helped out and stayed with him a few days. My mom and my aunt would take some nights, and then we would fill in the blanks with the caregivers that we were paying to come in, and we went through 2 or 3 because it is an interesting experience having somebody come into your home and finding somebody that can actually take care of somebody in that situation. Even though they're trained for that, what you're able to weather and what you're able to handle can become different. And each person is going to react to dementia differently. You're not going to get the same reactions out of people. So they can end up being agitated, or they can end up being way more kind of out of it and spacey. It really depends. And they can go through phases of it too, where sometimes they're a little more agitated, they're a little more confused and disoriented, and other times they're kind of just chill. And that definitely was my grandfather, as far as up and down, and kind of he would go through phases of all of the different things of how it looked. So it was really dynamic with how taking care of him was, and it was very interesting and an even greater learning experience to have the 2 different experiences for taking care of him versus taking care of my grandma. They were both very unique cases of it, and they had different sources of it, and we took care of them in different ways. I think the care home thing is very interesting because you really have to find somebody you trust. There are some scary stories that are out there, and that's why with our experiences with my grandma, we didn't jump straight into putting my grandfather into a care facility, because we wanted to first figure out kind of how much control we felt like we needed and how close of watch we wanted over him. And in the beginning, really, it was just people staying with him as much as they could rather than needing around-the-clock care, and then it turned into around-the-clock care. So it's super unique and dynamic, but knowing your options is really important. Care homes can vary widely. Some care homes don't actually take certain cases, and you have to find care homes that take Alzheimer's and dementia patients because they are who are trained to take care of those special circumstances. A normal, just assisted living facility might not suffice. Usually, they don't actually want those diagnoses because that puts a lot of liability on them. So, those are things to think about. You also have to think about your resources. What do you have as far as care goes? Do you have the money to pay for a care facility? Do you have the money to pay for in-home care? Do you have available family members that could either move them in with them or be with them on a regular basis? And what does their case really require as far as care? You know, how much medical stuff do they have? How confused do they get? What point in the process are they at? And how much kind of special attention do they need? how often do they need somebody with them to make sure they're okay? And that's going to vary between the cases. So I hope this gave you a little something to think about if this is something you're going through right now. Like I said, my family has had a lot of experience with this and such a hard time. I think the most emotional part of it for me was watching two people that I had grown up admiring and loving so much kind of slowly dwindle away. That is a hard thing. Planning for how this care is going to go ahead of time would have actually been a little more relieving, just because then amongst all of the emotions of it, you're not having to figure those things out, or not totally having to figure it out where you have no idea what you're doing. It makes it a little easier to have some kind of idea of like, oh, well, we can do this or that if it came down to it ahead of time. So if you have any specific questions, leave them in the comments below and I would love to answer them. If you have any other topics around dementia, I would love to see those as well, and I can maybe do a whole video series on it. I definitely have some stories I could tell. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it gave you a little food for thought and encouraged you in the process in some way. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you are not already, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye!